The ghostly commuter. The night was particularly quiet as I boarded the late-night train. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow on the empty seats. I chose a window seat, trying to shake off the feeling of fatigue from a long day. It was then that I noticed her. A woman sitting alone a few seats away, her face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her features. She wore a long, dark coat, and despite the chill in the air, she didn't seem bothered at all. I couldn't see her face clearly, but there was something unsettling about her presence. She sat perfectly still, hands resting in her lap, as if she was waiting for something, or someone. As the train lurched forward, I tried to shake off the unease and focused instead on the rhythmic clatter of the wheels against the tracks. But the deeper we plunged into the darkness of the tunnels, the more palpable the tension became. A sudden chill swept through the carriage, causing me to shiver. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, glancing at the other passengers. Most of them were engrossed in their phones or staring blankly ahead. But I could feel a heaviness in the air that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. When I looked back at the woman, she hadn't moved an inch. I felt a strange urge to find out what was behind that hat. But I hesitated. Instead, I turned my attention to the window, watching the dark tunnel blur past. Just as I was beginning to relax, I heard a soft whisper. It was barely audible, but it felt like it came from right next to me, sending a shiver down my spine. I glanced over my shoulder again. To my shock, the woman had vanished. The seat beside her was now occupied by a shadowy figure, a dark shape that seemed to absorb the light around it. I blinked hard, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the figure remained, unmoving and silent. My heart raced as I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. The train jolted, and the lights flickered ominously. The air grew colder still, and I felt a suffocating pressure in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadowy figure was watching me, waiting for something. Panic clawed at my throat, and I quickly turned to face the front of the train, trying to distance myself from the chilling presence beside me. But then the whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a ghostly breeze. I strained to make out the words, but they were indistinct, a haunting melody that sent chills down my spine. Just then, the lights flickered again, casting long shadows across the carriage, and I caught a glimpse of the figure in the corner of my eye. It was closer now, its outline becoming more defined. A gaunt face with hollow eyes that seemed to penetrate my very soul. Desperate to escape, I stood up and made my way toward the door, but as I approached, I realized that the exit was blocked by the shadowy figure. Fear gripped me. It was as if the train had turned into a cage, trapping me inside with this specter. I looked back at the empty seat where the woman had once sat. Where had she gone? What had she summoned into this train? With my heart pounding, I reached for the emergency button above my head, ready to alert the conductor. But before I could press it, the figure whispered my name, its voice a raspy echo that sent chills through my veins. I froze, heart racing as the whisper grew louder, wrapping around me like a cold fog. "Help me," it pleaded, the sound twisting in the air like a wisp of smoke. Suddenly, the train lurched again, and the lights flickered once more. In that fleeting moment of darkness, the shadow lunged toward me, its cold breath brushing against my face. I stumbled back, finally finding the strength to push through the fear. I bolted toward the door, ready to leap off the train if necessary. As the train screeched to a halt, I flung the door open and leaped onto the platform, gasping for air. I looked back just in time to see the shadowy figure dissipate into the air, merging with the darkness of the tunnel. The weight of dread lifted slightly, and I stumbled away from the train, my heart pounding. I glanced around, half expecting the ghostly woman to reappear or the whispers to follow me into the night. But there was nothing. Just the empty platform and the distant sound of trains echoing through the underground. I knew then that sometimes the scariest encounters happen not with what we can see, but with what remains hidden in the shadows. The flickering lights. Riding the subway late at night, I found myself alone in a nearly empty carriage, the soft hum of the train the only sound breaking the silence. The fluorescent lights above flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. Each time the lights dimmed, a cold draft swept through the carriage, chilling me to the bone. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in. Passengers around me seemed oblivious to the unsettling atmosphere. A couple sat engrossed in their phones. A man in a worn-out suit snored softly in the corner, and a woman in a long coat flipped through a book, her eyes scanning the pages as if nothing was amiss. Yet, no matter how hard I tried to focus on the mundane sounds of the subway, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the darkness beyond the windows. As we plunged deeper into the tunnels, the flickering lights became more pronounced. They illuminated the carriage in quick bursts, revealing glimpses of the other passengers, then plunging us back into shadow. The whispers of my imagination began to take shape, transforming the quiet carriage into a stage for something sinister. I glanced at the windows, my heart racing. The tunnel walls rushed past, dark and foreboding, and for a moment, I thought I caught a glimpse of movement, a figure lurking just beyond the reach of the flickering lights. The air grew heavier, suffocating. I could feel my pulse quicken, each thump echoing in my ears. I forced myself to look around, attempting to ground myself in the reality of my surroundings. "It's just the darkness playing tricks," I muttered under my breath. But a chill ran down my spine as I caught the eyes of the man in the suit, who suddenly sat upright, his gaze fixed on the window with an expression of horror. He didn't look away, as if he were mesmerized by something just beyond the glass. Curiosity tugged at me, and I leaned closer to the window, peering into the void. At first, all I saw was the tunnel, dimly lit and unyielding, but then, as the lights flickered again, I swore I saw something shift, something tall and shadowy, standing just out of reach of the flickering glow. My breath hitched in my throat. Was I imagining things? I shook my head, willing myself to dismiss it as a figment of my tired mind. But then the draft returned, stronger this time, swirling around me like a ghostly embrace. I pulled my gaze from the window, my eyes darting to the other passengers, who remained oblivious. The cold seeped into my bones, and I felt a sense of urgency wash over me. I needed to get off this train. As if sensing my distress, the lights flickered once more, plunging the carriage into darkness. I felt a presence behind me, a heavy, suffocating weight. I turned slowly, half expecting to see the shadow I had glimpsed earlier. But there was nothing. Just the sound of the train rolling through the tunnels and the faint whispers that began to fill the air, echoing off the walls like a ghostly chorus. The lights returned, and I saw the other passengers now looking at me, their faces expressionless. The man in the suit had moved closer, and I noticed something strange about his eyes. They were glassy and vacant, devoid of life. Panic surged through me, and I realized that I couldn't stay here any longer. I scrambled to my feet, pushing past the bewildered passengers as the train slowed to a stop. I hurried to the door, my heart pounding wildly. Just as I reached for the handle, the lights flickered one last time, and I felt a rush of cold air behind me. It was a fleeting sensation, but it was enough to freeze me in place. Suddenly, the doors slid open, and I bolted out onto the platform, gasping for breath. The cold night air hit me like a slap, snapping me back to reality. I turned to look back into the carriage, but the lights flickered again, and I could see the figure of the man in the suit, standing at the window, staring at me with that same haunting gaze. The train pulled away, leaving me standing on the platform, the darkness swallowing it whole. The whispers faded into the night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, lingering in the shadows. I knew I wouldn't take the subway again without glancing over my shoulder, wondering what lurked just out of sight. As I stepped away from the platform, the chill in the air remained, and I realized that some encounters leave a mark that lingers long after the lights go out. The Unseen Passenger. Sitting on a nearly empty train late at night, I sank into the hard plastic seat, grateful for the brief respite from my hectic day. The rhythmic clattering of the wheels against the tracks was oddly comforting as the train sped through the dark tunnels. A few tired commuters occupied distant seats, their heads bobbing as they dozed off. Yet despite the sparse crowd, I felt a strange sensation, a prickling awareness, as if someone were sitting next to me. Glancing sideways, I saw the empty seat beside me, but an unsettling feeling washed over me. It was as if the air had thickened, and the temperature around me dropped a few degrees. A chill danced along my spine, making the hair on my arms stand on end. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the feeling. It's just the late hour, I thought. Nothing to worry about. But as the train hurtled forward, I caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. My heart raced as I turned my head, searching the shadows beside me. There was nothing, just the empty seat and the dim light flickering overhead. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart, but the feeling persisted. It was as if a shadow stretched and contracted, lurking just beyond my vision. The lights above flickered again, casting quick flashes of illumination that sent my mind spiraling. With each flicker, I felt that cold presence beside me grow more palpable. I could almost sense its weight, an unseen passenger that had taken up residence in the seat next to me. Every nerve in my body screamed to get up, to move away from the unsettling emptiness beside me, but I remained frozen in place. I glanced around the carriage, but the other passengers seemed oblivious to my distress. A woman hunched over her phone, her face illuminated by the screen, while a man near the door tapped his foot impatiently, lost in his own world. I swallowed hard, trying to rationalize my anxiety. There's no one there. It's just your imagination. Yet the coldness beside me grew stronger, wrapping around me like a shroud. As the train sped through the dark tunnels, I felt my breath hitch in my throat. I leaned slightly toward the empty seat, half expecting to see something, a ghostly figure or a misplaced object. Instead, I was met with nothing but the hard, unyielding plastic. My pulse quickened, and I turned away, trying to focus on the rhythmic sounds of the train. But then I felt it again, a whisper of movement, a sensation of something pressing against me. I jerked my head back to the empty seat, and my breath caught in my throat. A shadow flickered at the corner of my vision, dark and elongated, as if it had a life of its own. My heart raced as I turned to confront whatever was beside me, but I was met only by empty air. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I took a deep breath and forced myself to move. I needed to change seats, to escape the oppressive presence that clung to me. I stood up, trembling slightly, and took a step toward the nearest exit. Just as I turned, I felt a chill sweep over me, as if the temperature had plummeted in an instant. Suddenly, I heard a soft whisper, a faint, breathy sound that sent a jolt of fear through me. It was barely audible, but it seemed to echo in the stillness of the carriage, growing louder with each passing second. I froze, my instincts screaming at me to flee, but I had to know. I had to face this unseen presence. I turned slowly, my heart pounding as I forced myself to look at the empty seat one last time. The lights flickered again, casting shadows that danced across the carriage, and for a brief moment, I saw it. A dark shape flickering in the dim light just beside where I had been sitting. It was as if the shadow itself was alive, stretching toward me, reaching out with unseen fingers. I gasped, stumbling back toward the door, desperate to escape. Just then, the train came to a sudden stop, jolting me forward. The door slid open, and I rushed out into the cool night air, gasping for breath. I turned to look back into the carriage, my heart still racing. The shadow was gone, but that whisper lingered, echoing in my mind like a haunting melody. As I stepped away from the train, I realized I wouldn't soon forget that unsettling presence. Even in the stillness of the night, the memory of that cold, unseen passenger clung to me, a reminder that sometimes the most chilling encounters come from those we can't see.